Welcome to World 360 with me, Akanksha Swaroop. Now, Chinese President Xi Jinping has turned on his diplomatic charm in Middle East to break the U.S. dominance. But what will this mean for India? And a high-profile prisoner swap has happened between the United States and Russia, but will it shine light into the fog of war? We'll deep dive into our lead stories, but first up are the headlines. A new axis is in the making between China, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan as Islamabad's two all-weather allies. Beijing and Riyadh signed 34 agreements during Xi's visit to the kingdom. This comes after Saudi Crown Prince cancelled his November trip to India. The American basketball star Brittany Griner has been freed after 10 months of incarceration in Russia. She was released in a prisoner swap that saw the U.S. release Victor Bout, an arms dealer once called the Merchant of Death. Iran has announced the first execution of a protester convicted over the recent anti-government unrest, while Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei's sister has condemned the nationwide crackdown and called on the Revolutionary Guards to lay down their weapons. Netflix has released the first 3 episodes of the much-anticipated docuseries Harry and Meghan, offering an intimate look at the lives of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Let's begin with our top focus on a triumvirate that is in the making as Chinese President Xi Jinping arrived in Saudi Arabia on Wednesday. And what was on the agenda? To break the long-time U.S. dominance in the region. Xi's diplomacy blitz included meeting 14 Middle Eastern leaders at the Gulf China Summit for Cooperation and Development. It also included the first ever Arab-China Summit for Cooperation and Development. Now, this ever since Xi secured an unprecedented third term. Interestingly, China and Saudi Arabia have signed 34 energy and investment deals. So much so, the series of strategic deals include one with Chinese tech giant Huawei as well. Prior to Xi's visit, Saudi Arabia and China were expected to sign more than 20 initial agreements worth more than $29.3 billion. But now they've signed 34 agreements. The development stands out in stark contrast to Saudi Arabia's frosty relationship with the United States. The summits have allowed Xi Jinping to position China as a friendly and reliable ally in stark contrast to the US. More importantly, what India needs to watch out is the making of a fresh strategic axis, one that is a triumvirate including China, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Now, Chinese President Xi's visit is primarily meant to boost Saudi's investment in the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. In fact, Saudi also plans to invest in China's Belt and Road Initiative, so much so Pak Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif visited Saudi Arabia in October this year for an investors' summit that's touted as Davos in the desert. And in fact, in 2019, Saudi Arabia had already announced plans to set up a $10 billion oil refinery in Pakistan's Gwadar port. And that is no secret. What's noteworthy is that the Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman cancelled his visit to New Delhi just last month in November. Team MBS had cited scheduling issues for that cancellation of his visit. MBS's visit was meant to discuss energy cooperation, oil trade and investment in renewable energy projects in India. But clearly, in terms of investment, Saudi Arabia has prioritized China. Should India be concerned about the China-Saudi-Pak axis? Let's find out. And for that, I'm joined in by former diplomat Mr. Ashok Sajanahar. Thank you so much, Mr. Sajanahar, for joining in on my show. Now, considering Xi's visit to Saudi Arabia included the Gulf China Summit for Cooperation and Development and the first ever Arab-China Summit for Cooperation and Development, these two countries have signed 34 energy and investment deals. That's huge. Is China now breaking the U.S. dominance that prevailed in Middle East so far?
Yes, I think the relations between Saudi Arabia and the United States and also a number of other Gulf states and the United States, they have been under some stress for some time now. I think the most obvious, as far as Saudi Arabia is concerned, the most obvious example of this was not only the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post journalist, some time ago, and then President Biden during his campaign had said that he is going to turn MBS and Saudi Arabia into a pariah state. But of course, the compulsions of geopolitics after he came to power, he has not been able to carry it through, and then he was forced to visit Saudi Arabia in July this year, trying to get more production of oil by the Gulf state, by the OPEC members, particularly after the sanctions on Russia had been imposed.
Right.
Unfortunately, that did not bear any result, any positive result. And also a recent cut by 2 million barrels a day by the OPEC countries, notwithstanding the fact that the United States and other countries were encouraging them to increase production. I think that has not gone down well in the US. So the relations between Saudi and the US have been under some strain. China has emerged as a very significant player as far as Saudi Arabia is concerned, the Gulf countries are concerned.
Now, we all know that Pak Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif had visited Saudi Arabia this October for the Saudi Future Investment Initiative Summit. And he even held consultations with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, considering Saudi has already invested in the oil refinery in Pakistan's Gwadar port back in 2019. And now China is seeking more investments from Saudi Arabia, that too for China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Should India be concerned about this new access or the triumvirate of Saudi, China and Pakistan?
Well, India, definitely it is a matter of concern for us also. But I would also like to say that India has its own strengths as far as Saudi Arabia is concerned, as far as the other Gulf countries are concerned. And the last few years, particularly since the time that Prime Minister Modi has come to power, I think this has been very evident that the relations have strengthened, the relations have diversified, the relations have deepened. So I think we need to continue, we need to focus on our own strengths, whether it is the presence of our diaspora, which is mutually beneficial for both the countries. India is the second largest importer of oil from Saudi Arabia. And so India also has a very important position as far as energy relationship is concerned with Saudi Arabia and with the other countries. Many of these countries have given their highest awards to Prime Minister Modi, so that relationship also at the individual leadership level is also very, very strong. But India, of course, should not be resting on its laurels.
All right. Many thanks to you, Ashok Sajanhar, for joining in on this show. And with that, let's now shift our focus over to US and Russia. A high-profile US-Russia prisoner swap has made headlines this week. Basketball star Brittany Griner is back in Texas and was greeted by tearful family and friends. The 32-year-old disappeared on 17th February this year, just days before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, as she was passing through Moscow's international airport. She was charged with carrying cannabis oil in her luggage and sentenced to 9 years in prison. Griner's return comes in exchange for convicted Russian arms dealer Viktor Bout, who has fueled some of the world's deadliest conflicts. Now, the White House's authorization to release a Russian felon, once nicknamed the Merchant of Death, underscored the escalating pressure that Joe Biden's administration faced to get Griner back home. The U.S. also tried to get Paul Whelan, former U.S. Marine, who was arrested on espionage charges in 2018 and was sentenced to 16 years in prison 2 years later. But he's, of course, not been brought back so far, and to no avail. The U.S. release of Viktor Bout, the man they call the Lord of War or the Merchant of Death, may be seen as a big public relations win for Russian President Vladimir Putin, and the Kremlin may likely take full advantage of the situation. CNN's Nick Payton-Walsh brings us a report.
He's the Lord of War, according to this fictional movie starring Nicolas Cage.
Say what you like about warlords and dictators, they always pay their bills on time.
Or the Merchant of Death, per a book about his alleged life. But despite much evidence, Victor Bout has always denied being one of the biggest arms dealers of the 90s, fueling civil wars and bolstering Moscow's interests. Yet he still never really wanted to be a nobody. Why do the Americans want you so badly?
Go and ask them. Go and ask the Bush administration, Obama administration. Go and ask Mrs. Clinton. You could have explained why they did it. I don't know. I have no clue.
Mr. Bout, good morning. He gave me his last interview in a Thai jail 13 years ago when he denied the worst charges against him.
This is a lie and I never supplied arms as such at all, and especially never had any deal with Al-Qaeda.
And with that, let's now shift our focus over to the UK royals who are under scrutiny once again now that Harry and Meghan have released a new docuseries on Netflix. In it, there are some startling revelations. Here's CNN News 18's Sanjay Suri bringing you a report.
The jury's out whether the first half of this H&M production, Harry and Meghan have started calling themselves H&M, whether this has done more damage to themselves or to the palace. To themselves, it really doesn't matter. They don't have a lot to lose. They've lost the palace and there are demands from MPs that they should be stripped of their royal titles. They don't mean a lot anyway. But now, really, they have taken another punch, a series of punches now at the palace, and particularly at King Charles, who is shown as stiff and austere, and William and Kate, who are shown as cold and unwelcoming, and particularly painful for many here in Britain has been a portrayal of the Queen and a ridiculing of some of the ways associated with the late Queen. The villain of the piece, of course, in the first half is the media, and particularly the tabloid media, but that then is only seen as a front for some within the palace and for established royalty, so that really it is the established royals being accused of unleashing a vicious and racist campaign against them. The palace stands once removed, but that may change in the second half, due for release on December the 15th, when the two are expected to speak of their direct experiences of racism within the palace, and that potentially is explosive.
What do these docuseries mean for the people in England? Let's quickly try and get in a sense of perspective, and for that, let me introduce my guest, royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams. He's joining us live. Thank you so much, Richard, for joining in on World 360. Now, what was your view of the first three episodes, especially on Harry's comparisons of Meghan with his mum Diana, the element of even Meghan's race, the couple's frustrations at the hands of British media, and Harry's watershed decision to leave the royal family in 2020?
I think this has been an extremely controversial series. This is, of course, the first three. We have 3 more hours next week of a 6-hour marathon, you could say. My own feeling is that the trailers beforehand, one of them was released during the Prince and Princess of Wales' visit to Boston, and that caused a lot of trouble. I think that the series is attempting to position her in that sort of future role. One of the things that I still wonder is what the Sussexes actually are going to do in future years. Will they be philanthropists, or will she go into politics? That remains unanswered. What this is about, however, primarily, because there's so much intimate footage, the fans will love this, which is included, is about money. The Sussexes have a contract with Netflix, which reportedly is worth $100 million. Right. Therefore, when you have a couple who talk frequently about how important it is to guard their privacy, and they release so many intimate messages, texts, photographs and the like.
All right, let's also discuss the impact of this, Richard. We're reading reports of a furious Prince William, also a Tory MP, considering a legislation stripping Harry and Meghan of their royal titles. The docuseries have dominated newspaper frontlines. Speculations are rife that the couple may not even receive a Christmas invite to Sandringham. with so much fury already directed towards Harry and Meghan, do you agree that this Netflix docuseries will only sort of deepen the rift between the couple and the Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace as well?
Yes, I do think that the series will deepen the rift. I, of course, mention again that it's important to remember we've only seen half of the 6 episodes. But it is very difficult for the royal family to know how to respond to the various claims Harry and Meghan are making about them. For example, Harry said that, and there was a lot about racism and the issues dealing with race in this documentary, that the royals suffer from unconscious bias. Palace will have an idea what it is actually facing and the impact that the series and the book will have made. But it's very difficult for the royals to know what to do. You can't do a point-by-point rebuttal that makes every issue that you disprove of a form of international media circus. You can't strip them of their titles. You mentioned this because, for example, it takes an act of parliament to remove the Dukedom of Sussex, and in any case, Harry would remain a prince because he is King Charles's son. It's the only thing that the royal family could do, and it's a nuclear option, is not to ask them to the wedding. And the only thing that the royal family could do, which is a nuclear option, is not to ask them to the coronation and cut off all ties with them.
I'm afraid we'll have to wait for the second volume to see the complete sort of impact of these docuseries. In the meantime, many thanks to you, Mr. Fitzwilliams, for joining in on our show World 360. And with that, let's now shift our focus over to the United States, where a lot has been happening as far as the politics of U.S. is concerned. Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock defeated Donald Trump's hand-picked Republican candidate Herschel Walker in the Georgia Senate runoff. Walker's defeat was a final midterm test of the former president's influence as he embarked on a third White House bid. Interestingly, the Democratic win happened on the same day that another blow was dealt to Donald Trump. The Trump Organization was found guilty of tax crimes conducted for over a decade, and the company is now likely to be fined nearly for $2 million. Meanwhile, House Republicans are already gearing up to investigate President Joe Biden and his family's business dealings, including Hunter Biden's laptop controversy. In January, Republicans take over the U.S. House of Representatives. What will this mean for the Republicans and for the Democrats as well? Let me try and get in a sense of perspective, and for that, let me introduce my guests. I'm joined in by Nicole Brenner-Schmitz, who's a Democratic strategist, and also Charmaine Yost, who's a Republican strategist. Many thanks to you, Charmaine and Nicole, for joining in. Nicole, if I may take my first question from you, be it Herschel Walker, Mehmet Oz, Blake Masters, Carrie Lake, or even, Adam Laxalt, Trump's favorites have faced defeat in the midterms. Is Herschel Walker's loss just more bad news for Donald Trump and the loss of faith in his leadership?
Yeah, I mean, look, he has had a terrible election year by all measures. People that he endorsed lost, like Herschel Walker and Dr. Oz, and people that he pushed really hard against, like Governor Kemp, ended up winning. And we are seeing a real conversation that we have never seen before happening within the Republican Party. But this is ultimately going to be something that their leaders really have to grapple with and decide what they're going to do going forward. Are they going to continue to let him have a stranglehold on their party, or are they going to change course? Because the reality is the American people rejected Donald Trump in 2020, and now they're rejecting his endorsed candidates because his policies and his tolerance for a certain amount of hatred and a possible insurrection on our democracy is not what the American people want going forward. And they're sending that message at the election box every time we're going to vote now.
All right, if I may bring in Charmaine on this. Charmaine, what's your view? Do you think this is the end of Donald Trump's presidency hopes for 2024?
There's a lot of Americans who feel very upset about the fact that the Hunter Biden story was suppressed during the 2020 election. We have polling data that shows that a significant percentage of independents would have voted differently in the 2020 election had they had more information about the Hunter Biden story.
All right.
A lot of Democrats are pushing back and saying that this is just a salacious story that's about pornographic images of Mr. Biden. However, the real root of the matter that people are looking at from a legal perspective are the accusations of corruption and money dealings that Hunter Biden was doing with foreign governments. Those are very, very serious charges that need to be addressed, and the facts need to be surfaced. That you need to really focus on the fact that that's what this story is about. Not the more salacious kinds of details of bad pictures and drug use and things like that. That's all a distraction that people are using to try to avoid addressing the real issues of corruption that this story reflects.
It's interesting that you mentioned Hunter Biden, and that is why, I'm going to ask you, House Republicans have vowed to investigate Joe Biden and his family's business dealings, especially his son, Hunter Biden. Federal prosecutors have been investigating Hunter Biden since 2018 and have not brought any charges yet. What will be at the heart of top Republican James Comer's investigations?
Well, there's an old saying in America that victory has a lot of fathers and losses do not. And so this is the problem with politics, is particularly in the United States, when we have with our federal system, is that every single election has a lot of complex and differing contributing factors to it. Certainly Donald Trump is one of them. But I think that when you look at Georgia and the fact that there are a lot of underlying factors and a lot of changing dynamics with a state that has been traditionally Republican and that is now moving, as we call it in the United States, more purple, meaning that it's more and more blue. I think there's a lot of different factors. You can't fully lay it at the feet of Donald Trump. He held himself back and did not participate much in that particular campaign. So a lot of attention will be paid to Georgia in the 2024 cycle to see what the real factor going on there was.
All right, many thanks to you, Charmaine and Nicole, for joining in on my show. And with that, it's time to slip into a quick break. But don't go anywhere, because we'll be back with the latest in terms of what's happening in Iran. Remember, the country continues to remain on a boil.